The Galactic Council's observation deck hummed with the usual mixture of diplomatic chatter and barely concealed judgment. Ambassador Threx of the Kvalan Empire adjusted his sensory appendages, watching the viewport with what could only be described as profound disappointment. Below, on the training grounds of Station Kepler 9, humanity had sent their representative for the Interspecies Youth Combat Evaluation Program. A child. Not just any child, but a scrawny human girl who looked no older than 7 solar cycles, with wild auburn hair pulled into an uneven ponytail and a gap-toothed smile that suggested she had absolutely no idea what she'd gotten herself into. Her name tag read Mira Kellison, and she wore a faded blue jumpsuit that had clearly seen better days. "This is what Earth sends." Threx clicked his mandibles in what passed for a Kvalan laugh. "A youngling who probably still requires assistance with basic metabolic functions." Beside him, Commander Vosh of the Thurian hegemony rippled her translucent skin in agreement. The humans have finally revealed their true weakness. They coddle their offspring to such an extent that they believe a child can compete with trained juvenile warriors from across the galaxy. The other assembled dignitaries murmured their consensus. This was going to be a massacre, and not the entertaining kind. The human delegation would be humiliated, their application for advanced military trade agreements would be denied, and the galaxy could go back to viewing Earth as the quaint little backwater it clearly was. What none of them noticed at first was the small creature following 3 paces behind young Mira Kellison. It was roughly the size of a Kvalan warhound, but built lower to the ground, with thick gray and white fur, small rounded ears, and a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of vague annoyance. Its claws clicked against the metal floor with each deliberate step. It wore no restraints, no collar, no indication of being controlled in any way. "What is that thing?" asked Diplomat Zarin of the Floating Cities. Her 6 eyes narrowed as she tried to place the creature in her extensive xenobiological database. One of the human attendants, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the bearing of someone who'd stopped being surprised by anything years ago, glanced up at the observation deck. Through the comm system, her voice carried a hint of amusement. "That's Brutus. He's a honey badger. Mira's emotional support animal." The observation deck fell silent. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. "An emotional support animal." Threx slapped his primary limbs against the viewport. "Not even a combat beast, not a war companion, an emotional support creature for a child who is already too fragile to compete." But the human attendant, whose name badge identified her as Dr. Helen Vasquez, simply shrugged. "We did file the proper paperwork. Brutus goes where Mira goes. Medical necessity." Down, on the training ground, Mira seemed oblivious to the mockery echoing from above. She knelt down, running her small hand along Brutus's spine, and whispered something too quiet for the sensors to pick up. The honey badger's small eyes blinked slowly, and if Threx didn't know better, he'd say the creature looked almost bored. The evaluation was about to begin. The first challenge was simple enough, standard across all Council youth programs. Navigate the obstacle course, reach the far platform, secure the beacon. Time and efficiency were measured, but more importantly, composure under pressure. Holographic threats would appear, terrain would shift, sensory overload would be induced through carefully calibrated stimuli. 7 other juveniles stood at the starting line. There was Kresh, a young Kvalan warrior in training, his exoskeleton already hardening into battle plates. There was Liss, a Thurian combat prodigy whose species could phase through solid matter for brief moments. There was Gormath, a heavily muscled Kryn whose people were known across 3 sectors as the galaxy's finest mercenaries. And there was Mira, adjusting the straps on her small backpack, with Brutus sitting calmly beside her. The starting klaxon blared. Kresh launched himself forward with impressive speed, his multiple legs carrying him across the shifting platforms with practiced ease. Liss phased through the first barrier, reappearing on the other side with fluid grace. Gormath simply smashed through obstacles, his thick hide impervious to the holographic plasma bursts. Mira started walking. Not running, not sprinting. Walking, as if she were strolling through a park on Earth, while Brutus padded alongside her with that same expression of mild irritation. "Pathetic," Threx muttered. "She'll be eliminated within minutes." The first holographic threat materialized. A Shrike viper, one of the most feared predators in the known galaxy. Its fangs dripped poison, its scales reflected light in hypnotic patterns designed to freeze prey in terror. The juvenile competitors were meant to dodge, to use evasion techniques, to demonstrate their understanding of survival protocols. Kresh veered left. Liss phased through it. Gormath tanked the hologram, proving his people's resistance to toxins. Mira stopped walking. The holographic Shrike viper lunged at her, jaws wide. And Brutus, without any visible signal from his human, moved. For something that had appeared so calm, so unbothered, the honey badger's transformation was shocking. He didn't dodge, he didn't evade. He went straight for the hologram's throat with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for an Earth creature. His claws extended, his own jaws opening to reveal teeth that suddenly seemed much, much larger than they had any right to be. The hologram flickered and died as Brutus's attack disrupted the projection matrix. Did that creature just attack a hologram? Commander Vosh leaned forward, her skin rippling with confusion. "It's not real. How did it damage the projection?" Dr. Vasquez's voice came through again, flat and professional. "Honey badgers don't care about your technology. If it threatens Mira, Brutus interprets it as real. The kinetic force of his attack was sufficient to disrupt the emitters." The observation deck had gone very, very quiet. Mira resumed walking. The second obstacle was a ravine crossing. Suspended cables, swinging platforms, and a drop that, while not actually dangerous due to safety netting, was designed to trigger primal fear responses in most species. Kresh used his climbing abilities to navigate the underside of the structure. Liss phased across the gaps. Gormath simply leapt, his powerful legs carrying him across distances that would terrify most beings. Mira stood at the edge, looking down at the 60-meter drop. Her small hands gripped the safety cable. She looked scared, and for the first time, the observers in the deck felt something other than amusement. They felt validation. This was what they'd expected. The human child was experiencing appropriate fear. She would freeze or cry or call for her adult handlers. Brutus looked up at Mira. Then he looked at the ravine. Then he looked back at Mira. And the honey badger did something that would be analyzed in xenobehavioral studies for years to come. He walked to the edge, peered over, and without hesitation, stepped off. "What is it doing?" Zarin shrieked. "It's going to die." But Brutus didn't die. His claws extended, catching on the mesh of the safety netting below, and he proceeded to climb, claw over claw, straight up the opposite side of the ravine. When he reached the top, he turned around and made a sound, a low rumbling chuff that somehow carried across the distance. Mira's scared expression transformed into a smile. And then that 7-year-old human child grabbed the cable and swung herself across the ravine, her small body arcing through the air with more courage than technique, and landed in a tumbling roll on the other side where Brutus waited. She used the emotional support animal as motivation, Threx said slowly. It demonstrated that the crossing was survivable, eliminating her fear response. "That's not what happened," Dr. Vasquez corrected, and there was something in her voice now, something that might have been pride. Brutus showed Mira that he trusted she could make it, and Mira trusted him back. That's what humans do. We find something worth trusting, and we become braver than we have any right to be. The third obstacle appeared, a maze of shifting corridors filled with disorienting lights and sounds. This was designed to test cognitive mapping and stress management. All the juvenile competitors slowed here, even mighty Gormath, as they tried to calculate optimal paths while their senses were assaulted by stimuli specifically tailored to their species. But Mira and Brutus moved through it like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Because, as it turned out, Brutus didn't navigate by sight or sound. Honey badgers hunted underground, in the dark, in tunnels and warrens where such things were useless. He followed scent, followed air currents, followed instincts honed by millions of years of evolution on a death world called Earth. And Mira simply followed Brutus. They emerged from the maze first. Not last. First. Kresh was still inside, frantically trying to map the changing walls. Liz had phased through 3 barriers and gotten herself temporarily trapped in a solid section. Gormath had attempted to smash his way out and triggered a penalty. A human child and her emotional support animal had just outperformed the best juvenile warriors from 3 military powers. The observation deck was no longer laughing. The final challenge of the first evaluation stage was combat simulation. Each juvenile would face an opponent tailored to their skill level, a holographic adversary that would test their tactical thinking and fighting capability without actual danger. Kresh fought a sandcrawler from his homeworld, demonstrating the traditional claw strikes of Kavalan combat arts. Liz battled a phase predator, showing her ability to time her intangibility. Gormath faced down a Kryn Battlemaster simulation, using the techniques taught to his people since childhood. Each performed adequately. Each showed the training expected of their species. Then it was Mira's turn. The hologram that materialized before her was a Kavalan adult warrior, full-sized, fully armed with plasma blades, and programmed to the juvenile human difficulty setting, which meant it would move slowly, telegraph its attacks, and generally operate at about 30% combat efficiency. It was meant to be educational, not threatening. Threx leaned forward. Finally, we'll see this child face something approximating real danger. The simulation is calibrated perfectly. She'll learn a valuable lesson about her limitations. The Kavalan warrior hologram raised its plasma blade. Brutus, who had been sitting calmly beside Mira throughout every other competitor's combat trial, stood up. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the comm. "We should probably mention something about honey badgers." "What about them?" Commander Vosh asked. "They have very poor eyesight. They can't really distinguish between a hologram and a real threat based on visual input alone." So Brutus thinks that's a real Kavalan warrior about to attack Mira." The honey badger made a sound. It wasn't a growl, exactly. It wasn't a roar. It was something far more unsettling, a rattling, hissing, grunting noise that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal, from a place where logic and civilization had never existed. And then Brutus attacked. What happened next would be shown in military academies across the galaxy, studied frame by frame, analyzed for tactical implications that would reshape combat doctrine. The honey badger didn't go for the hologram's weapons. He went for its legs, his low profile making him nearly impossible for the Kavalan warrior simulation to track. His claws found purchase in the holographic armor, disrupting the projection even as his jaws clamped down on what should have been the warrior's ankle joint. The simulation tried to adapt, tried to kick away this unexpected variable, but Brutus was already climbing, using the warrior's own body as a ladder, heading straight up with single-minded determination, toward the throat. The hologram flickered and died as Brutus's claws shredded through the projection matrix at the neck, exactly where a real Kavalan's primary blood vessels would be. The entire attack had taken 4 seconds. Mira stood there, eyes wide, mouth open in shock. She clearly hadn't expected that either. The simulation's end klaxon blared, indicating a successful defeat of the combat challenge. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because they'd all just watched an Earth creature, an animal brought along for emotional support, dismantle a Kavalan warrior hologram with the kind of vicious efficiency that professional soldiers spent years trying to achieve. Brutus walked back to Mira, sat down beside her, and resumed his expression of vague annoyance, as if nothing remarkable had happened at all. "What?" Threx's mandibles clicked uselessly. "What did we just witness?" Dr. Vasquez sighed, the sound of someone who'd tried to warn people and been ignored. "Honey badgers are from Earth. They evolved in an environment where everything, and I mean everything, was trying to kill them. Lions, hyenas, leopards, venomous snakes, each other. Their skin is so tough that bee stings don't penetrate it. Their metabolism can process toxins that would kill most species, and they have absolutely zero fear response. None. There's a reason the old nature documentaries about them were titled things like "The World's Most Fearless Creature." "But it's so small," Zarin protested. "It's barely larger than a Thurian infant." Size doesn't matter when you're willing to fight anything, anytime, without hesitation or self-preservation instinct. Honey badgers have been documented attacking buffalo, raiding beehives despite thousands of stings, and digging their way out of reinforced concrete enclosures. They don't care about the odds. They don't care about pain. They certainly don't care about your social hierarchies or your military rankings. Commander Vosh's skin had gone pale, the Thurian equivalent of shock. "And you gave one to a child as an emotional support animal?" Brutus was rescued from a breeding program when he was a kid. He imprinted on Mira when she was 5. They've been together ever since. Where Mira goes, Brutus goes. That's the arrangement. Down on the training ground, Mira had knelt beside Brutus, running her small hands through his fur, whispering what might have been praise or reassurance, or both. The honey badger's eyes were half closed, content, as if the last few minutes of violence had been nothing more than a mild diversion. The first evaluation stage was over. Mira Kellison, age 7, from Earth, had placed first in every category, and nobody was laughing anymore. The second day brought advanced challenges. These were designed for older juveniles, creatures with more training, more experience, more physical development. The council observers had convened an emergency session overnight, debating whether to even allow the human child to continue. But the regulations were clear. She'd qualified. She could proceed. The first advanced challenge was the tracking exercise. Each juvenile would be given a target signature and told to locate it within the training complex, a sprawling maze of corridors, rooms, and environmental zones that mimicked various planetary conditions. This was where superior senses should have given the alien competitors the advantage. Kavalan could detect electrical fields. Thurians could sense thermal variations. Kryn could hear heartbeats from 50 meters away. But Brutus could smell. And what most species didn't realize was that Earth's atmosphere was so thick, so rich in organic compounds, so absolutely saturated with scent markers, that terrestrial predators had evolved olfactory capabilities that bordered on supernatural by galactic standards. Brutus found the target in 11 minutes. The next fastest competitor took 43 minutes. But it was the wilderness survival challenge that truly demonstrated the fundamental difference between Earth creatures and everyone else. The juveniles were placed in a simulated hostile environment, a jungle moon with dangerous flora, unpredictable weather, and holographic predators that would stalk them for 12 hours. They had basic supplies, basic tools, and instructions to build a defensible shelter and secure food and water. This was meant to take the full 12 hours. This was meant to push them to their absolute limits. Kresh began calculating optimal shelter positions based on terrain elevation. Liss started gathering materials for a phased disruption perimeter. Gormath simply found the largest tree and prepared to sleep in it, Kryn style, trusting his hide to protect him. Mira sat down on a log, pulled a slightly squashed sandwich from her backpack, and started eating lunch. "What is she doing?" Threx hissed. "She's not even trying." But Dr. Vasquez was watching Brutus, and her expression suggested she knew exactly what was about to happen. The honey badger was digging. His powerful claws tore through the simulated soil like it wasn't even there, excavating with the kind of focused intensity that suggested this was what he'd been bred to do for thousands of generations. Within 20 minutes, he'd created a burrow system with multiple entrances, escape routes, and a central chamber large enough for Mira to curl up in comfortably. Then he went hunting. The holographic predators, programmed to provide educational challenges, approached the area where Mira sat. They were meant to test her alertness, her ability to detect threats. They detected Brutus instead. Or rather, they failed to detect him until it was too late. The first holographic predator, a six-legged ambush hunter, died with Brutus's teeth in its throat equivalent. The second tried to flee and was run down from behind. The third simply shut off its projection as a safety measure because the honey badger's attack had been so focused on the hologram's vulnerable points that the system flagged it as potentially dangerous to the emitters. Brutus dragged the deactivated holograms back to Mira, dropping them at her feet like trophies. Mira scratched behind his ears. "Good boy, Brutus. Very good boy." The honey badger made that same rumbling chuff, pleased with himself. 6 hours into the 12-hour challenge, while the other juveniles were still struggling with basic shelter construction, Mira was napping in a secure burrow, with food supplies, water access from an underground stream Brutus had found, and a perimeter that no holographic predator would dare approach. She'd completed the challenge in 1/4 the expected time, using none of the provided supplies, relying entirely on her partnership with a creature that the galaxy had dismissed as an emotional support animal. "This is absurd," Commander Vosh declared. "She's not demonstrating any skills. The creature is doing everything." "With respect, Commander," Dr. Vasquez replied, and her voice had gone cold now, professional in a way that suggested she was done being polite. "That is the skill. Humans don't survive alone. We never have. We survive by forming partnerships, by building trust, by recognizing that working with another being can accomplish more than working alone. Mira has demonstrated tactical thinking, resource management, threat assessment, and interspecies cooperation. If you can't see that, then perhaps your evaluation criteria are flawed." The observation deck fell silent again. But this time it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of people being forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The final challenge of the second day was team combat. 3 juveniles would be selected randomly to face a combat scenario together, testing their ability to coordinate with unfamiliar allies under pressure. The random selection algorithm assigned Mira, Kresh, and Liss to one team. Kresh immediately tried to take command, clicking orders in the Kavalan military style, demanding formations, insisting on traditional tactics. Mira ignored him and looked at Liss. "Hi, I'm Mira. This is Brutus. What can you do?" Liss, who'd spent the entire evaluation trying to prove herself worthy of her people's warrior traditions, blinked her multiple eyes in surprise. "I can phase through solid matter for short periods, but it takes time to recover between uses." "That's really cool," Mira said, and she meant it, the genuine enthusiasm of a child, discovering something amazing. "We should use that. Brutus is really good at finding things and fighting. I'm good at climbing and squeezing into small spaces. What if you phased through walls to spot enemies, then told us where they were, and Brutus and I did the actual fighting?" It was simple. It was direct. It completely ignored Kresh's complicated military formations. It was also obviously the correct tactical approach. The combat scenario began. They faced a mock enemy position with multiple defensive layers, guard rotations, and strategic choke points. Kresh tried to lead a frontal assault, the traditional Kavalan approach. He lasted approximately 30 seconds before being eliminated by the simulation. Liss phased through the outer wall, spotted 6 guard positions and a command center, phased back, and reported what she'd found. Mira listened, nodded, and then whispered something to Brutus. What followed was beautiful in its simplicity. Liss would phase through, create a distraction, phase back. While the guards investigated, Mira would climb through ventilation systems or scale walls, accessing areas the guards had deemed impossible to reach. And Brutus, moving low and silent, would take out isolated guards with that same shocking violence he'd shown before. They cleared the scenario in 14 minutes. The previous record, set by a team of Kryn combat specialists, had been 31 minutes. And they'd done it by ignoring everything the military powers of the galaxy considered proper tactics. As the day ended and the juveniles were dismissed to their quarters, Threx stood at the viewport, watching Mira walk hand in hand with Dr. Vasquez, while Brutus padded alongside them with that same unbothered expression. "I don't understand," he admitted, his mandibles drooping in confusion. "She's just a child. That creature is just an animal. They shouldn't have beaten everyone. It defies every principle of combat evaluation we've established." Dr. Vasquez, who was passing by the observation deck on her way out, paused. She looked up at the assembled dignitaries, these mighty representatives of powerful civilizations, and smiled. "You want to know the secret? Fine, I'll tell you. Humans didn't evolve as the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We evolved as the most stubborn. We evolved to look at something that should kill us and think, what if we became friends with it instead? We domesticated wolves into dogs. We partnered with horses. We keep cats, even though they're pure murder on a biological level. And honey badgers, creatures that by all rights should terrify us. We looked at them and thought, what if that was on our side?" She gestured to where Mira was giggling at something Brutus had done, probably rolling in dirt or doing something else typically undignified. That little girl and that honey badger trust each other completely. And when humans trust something, when we bond with it, we become capable of things that look like magic to everyone else. That's what you're seeing. Not weakness, partnership. The thing that let us climb to the top of Earth's food chain despite being weak, slow, and fragile. Dr. Vasquez walked away, leaving the observation deck in stunned silence. Tomorrow would bring the final challenges, the ones meant only for the most exceptional juveniles. The trials that would truly test whether humanity belonged among the galactic powers. And somewhere in her assigned quarters, Mira Kellison was falling asleep with her head pillowed on Brutus's stomach, while the honey badger kept watch with half-open eyes, ready to fight anything that threatened his human. Because that's what they did. That's what they'd always done. And the galaxy was just beginning to understand what that meant. The third day of evaluation brought something unprecedented in Council history. The observation deck was now packed with dignitaries who traveled from across 3 sectors, all demanding to witness the human child and her creature firsthand. Military analysts had spent the night reviewing footage. Xenobiologists had submitted 14 separate research proposals, and at least 3 governments had lodged formal complaints suggesting the entire evaluation was somehow fraudulent. Ambassador Threx found himself pushed to the back of his own observation post, displaced by a Vryn Imperial assessor whose crystalline carapace reflected the viewport lights in dizzying patterns. Commander Vosh had been joined by 6 Thurian military commanders, each rippling with barely contained skepticism. On the training ground below, Mira arrived wearing the same faded blue jumpsuit, her auburn hair still in that messy ponytail, looking for all the galaxy like she'd rather be doing literally anything else. She yawned, rubbed her eyes, and sat down cross-legged on the floor to wait for instructions. Brutus emerged from the transport carrier behind her, stopped to scratch behind his ear with a hind leg, then waddled over to flop down beside Mira with a grunt that suggested profound indifference to the dozens of alien dignitaries watching his every move. "They look tired," observed Zarin. Perhaps yesterday's challenges were too much for such a young organism. Dr. Vasquez, who'd been given a seat in the observation deck today, whether out of respect or morbid curiosity, shook her head. Brutus kept Mira up half the night playing. He found a cleaning robot and decided it was the most interesting thing he'd encountered on this station. Chased it for 3 hours before Mira could get him to settle down. "It was playing?" The Vryn assessor's voice resonated like wind chimes. "Before the most important evaluation trials of its life? He's a honey badger. He does what he wants. That's kind of the whole deal with his species." The first challenge of the final day was announced. Strategic problem solving under pressure. Each remaining juvenile, there were only 5 now, would be placed in a scenario with no obvious solution, multiple variables, and a ticking clock. This was designed to identify future leaders, tacticians, commanders. The scenario was simple in concept, nightmarish in execution. A damaged colony ship was losing life support. There were 40 colonists. but only 20 spaces in the escape pods. The juveniles had to decide who lived and who died, then implement their decision while holographic colonists pleaded, argued, and tried to influence the outcome. This was meant to break them. This was meant to reveal their character under impossible pressure. Gormath went first. The Kryn juveniles selected the 20 strongest colonists, the ones most likely to survive and rebuild. It was logical, efficient, and left the holographic children and elderly to die screaming in the corridors. He completed the scenario in 8 minutes, his face betraying no emotion whatsoever. Liz approached it differently. She spent precious minutes trying to negotiate, trying to find alternative solutions, trying to save everyone. When forced to choose, she selected based on specialized skills, preserving the engineers and doctors. She finished in 19 minutes, visibly shaken by the experience. Then it was Mira's turn. The 7-year-old human child stood in the holographic colony ship corridor, surrounded by desperate holographic colonists, with Brutus sitting calmly at her feet. The countdown clock started. 40 colonists, 20 spaces, 10 minutes to decide. Mira looked at the colonists. She looked at the escape pods. She looked down at Brutus. Then she turned and started walking away from the escape pod bay entirely. "What is she doing?" Threx demanded. "She's going the wrong direction." But Dr. Vasquez was leaning forward now, her tired eyes suddenly alert. "Oh no. What? She's not playing their game." Mira found what she was looking for in a storage bay, simulated equipment for a simulated crisis. She started pulling out pressure suits, the kind designed for emergency repairs on the hull. Adult-sized, far too large for her, but she dragged them into the corridor anyway. "There's not enough oxygen in those suits to matter," the Vryn assessor stated. "Even if she distributed them to the colonists staying behind, they'd only gain minutes of life. This is pointless." But Mira wasn't distributing the suits. She was doing something to them, her small hands working at the seals, disconnecting components, jury-rigging connections that made no sense to the observers. Brutus, meanwhile, had started digging into the floor. "Stop him!" someone shouted. "That creature is damaging the simulation hardware." "Actually," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, "I think he's helping her solve the problem." Mira's voice carried through the simulation audio, high and clear as she addressed the holographic colonists. "The escape pods can't hold everyone, right? But what if we didn't use them to escape? What if we used them as temporary life support pods while we fix the ship?" The holograms, programmed to respond dynamically to juvenile decisions, paused in their panic. One of them, a simulated engineer, responded, "The main reactor is damaged. We can't repair it in time." "But we don't need the main reactor," Mira continued, her hands still working on the pressure suit modifications. "We just need enough power for life support. And look, Brutus found the emergency battery junction under the floor. If we reroute power from the escape pods, we don't have to choose at all." What followed was 10 minutes of chaos as Mira directed holographic colonists to implement a solution that shouldn't have worked, that violated the fundamental premise of the scenario, that required thinking so far outside the established parameters that the simulation AI actually paused twice to verify it was receiving correct inputs. But it worked. All 40 colonists survived. The escape pods were converted to temporary life support. The emergency batteries provided enough power for basic systems, and Brutus, somehow, had managed to access junction points in the floor that hadn't been marked on any schematic, as if the honey badger could sense electrical currents through pure instinct. The countdown clock stopped with 43 seconds remaining. Mira had completed the impossible scenario by refusing to accept that it was impossible. The observation deck erupted in argument. Half the dignitaries claimed she'd cheated, that she'd violated the scenario parameters, that her solution was invalid. The other half was frantically recalculating their assessments of human cognitive capability. The Vryn assessor's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The scenario's purpose was to evaluate decision-making under pressure. She made a decision. She executed it successfully. The scenario did not explicitly forbid alternative solutions, By our own regulations, her approach is valid. Threx felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. He felt foolish, because of course a species that had survived Earth would approach problems differently. Of course they'd reject false choices and binary thinking. They came from a world where the only rule was survive, and if the established methods didn't work, you invented new ones. The second final challenge was announced, and this one made several of the observers shift uncomfortably. Endurance trial. 48 hours in a hostile environment with minimal supplies, no shelter, and randomized hazards. This wasn't meant to be completed so much as survived. The juveniles would be extracted when they either signaled for help or when their vital signs indicated distress. Most juveniles lasted between 12 and 20 hours before extraction became necessary. Mira and Brutus were placed in a simulation of a Thurian death marsh, complete with caustic water, poisonous plant life, and predators designed to hunt in the darkness. The temperature would swing from freezing to scorching. The terrain would shift. Sleep deprivation and hunger would compound every other challenge. The observers settled in for a long watch, expecting the human child to last perhaps 6 hours before her fragile biology forced extraction. They were still watching 30 hours later. Mira had found a relatively dry mound and created a shelter from scavenged materials that shouldn't have been structurally sound, but somehow was. Brutus had disappeared into the marsh for hours at a time, returning with holographic prey, demonstrating his species' famous ability to hunt anything, anywhere, regardless of environmental conditions. But it was the way they worked together that fascinated the xenobiologists in the observation deck. When Mira's body temperature began dropping dangerously at night, Brutus would curl around her, his thick fur and high metabolism providing warmth. When the honey badger showed signs of the minor wounds that were accumulating from his hunts, Mira used her limited first aid supplies on him first, despite her own cuts and bruises. "She's prioritizing the animal over herself," Commander Vosh observed. "That's tactically unsound. She's the primary competitor. It should be expendable." Dr. Vasquez turned to look at the Thurian commander with an expression that could have frozen hydrogen. "If you ever refer to Brutus as expendable again, I'll file a formal complaint with your government. That's her partner. You don't understand what that means because your species doesn't form bonds like humans do. We'd die for our partners. We'd kill for them. That's not a weakness. That's what makes us dangerous." Hour 36 arrived. Gormath had been extracted at hour 19, Liss at hour 23. The only juvenile still in the trial besides Mira was Kresh, the Kavailon warrior trainee, and he was clearly struggling, his movements sluggish, his decision-making impaired. Mira was teaching Brutus to play a counting game using pebbles. "Is she aware this is an endurance trial?" Zarin asked weakly. "Oh, she's aware," Dr. Vasquez replied. "She's just been camping with Brutus since she was 5 years old. Her parents take them into the wilderness every summer. This is actually easier than some of the places they've been because at least the predators here are holograms." Hour 40 arrived. Kresh signaled for extraction, his pride finally surrendering to physical necessity. The observers assumed they'd pull Mira out as well, that she'd proven her point, that continuing was unnecessary. But when the extraction team contacted Mira via comm, she looked confused. "We can keep going," her small voice came through the speakers. "Brutus found a really good spot to catch fish things. We're fine." "The trial is effectively over," the coordinator explained. "You've outlasted all other competitors. Extraction is available now." Mira looked at Brutus. The honey badger looked back at her. Some wordless communication passed between them, the kind that shouldn't have been possible, between species separated by millions of years of evolution. "We'll finish the 48 hours, Mira said. "We said we would, so we will." And they did. When the extraction team finally retrieved them at exactly 48 hours, Mira was tired, dirty, and covered in marsh mud. Brutus was completely unbothered, looking around as if disappointed the trial was ending just when things were getting interesting. Dr. Vasquez met them at the decontamination station, wrapping Mira in a blanket and checking her for injuries while Brutus submitted to a veterinary scan with obvious reluctance. "You didn't have to stay the full time," Dr. Vasquez said softly, running her fingers through Mira's tangled hair. "But we wanted to," Mira replied, her gap-toothed smile returning. "It was kind of fun." Brutus really liked the challenge. The honey badger grunted, which could have meant anything or nothing. The final challenge was announced, and this one brought absolute silence to the observation deck. Individual combat assessment. Not simulated, not holographic. Real. Each juvenile would face a trained adult warrior from their own species in supervised combat. Non-lethal weapons, protective gear, medical teams on standby, but real contact, real pain, real defeat or victory. This was the test that separated juveniles from warriors. This was where most failed. Kresh faced a Kvalon instructor and lasted 7 minutes before submission. Liss faced a Thurian combat specialist and managed 11 minutes before being overwhelmed. Both performances were considered exceptional for their age groups. Then Mira stepped onto the combat platform, and the observers finally saw what humanity had sent to oversee this evaluation. The adult human who entered from the opposite side wasn't particularly large by galactic standards, but she moved with a precision that suggested decades of experience. Her name badge identified her as Captain Sarah Chen, Human Defense Force, hand-to-hand combat specialist. Wait. The observers had specifically said not to use that name, but here it was, because sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Or perhaps because Dr. Vasquez had specifically requested someone Mira knew and trusted for this final trial. Captain Chen knelt down to Mira's level. "Remember what we practiced?" Mira nodded, suddenly looking nervous for the first time in 3 days. "And remember, I'm not going to go easy on you just because you're 7. If you want to earn your marks, you have to really try, okay?" Another nod. Brutus, sitting at the platform's edge, made a low rumbling sound. Captain Chen glanced at the honey badger. "Yeah, I know you're watching. Stay there unless she signals for help. Those are the rules." The honey badger's eyes narrowed, but he stayed put. The combat trial began. What the observers witnessed next would be dissected in military academies for generations, not because it was particularly sophisticated, but because it demonstrated something the galaxy hadn't fully understood about human combat philosophy. Captain Chen didn't attack to hurt Mira. She attacked to teach her. Every strike was telegraphed just enough that Mira could respond if she was paying attention. Every grapple was executed with just enough force to be real, but not enough to cause injury. And when Mira made mistakes, when she left herself open or failed to defend properly, Captain Chen would pause, explain what went wrong, and let her try again. This wasn't combat. This was education disguised as combat. "That's not a legitimate trial," Threx protested. "The adult is holding back." "Of course she's holding back," Dr. Vasquez snapped. "Mira is 7 years old. The point isn't to see if she can beat an adult warrior. The point is to see if she can learn, adapt, and improve under pressure. Watch." And they watched as Mira, over the course of 15 minutes, actually got better. Her blocks became more efficient. Her counters became faster. She started reading Captain Chen's movements, anticipating attacks, responding with the kind of tactical thinking that took most species years to develop. She didn't win. She was never going to win. But by the end, she'd landed 3 solid strikes, executed 2 successful grapples, and demonstrated combat awareness that exceeded every other juvenile in the evaluation. When Captain Chen finally called the trial complete, she picked Mira up in a hug that would have crushed most juvenile aliens, but just made the little girl giggle. "You did great, kid. Really great." Brutus, who'd been vibrating with barely contained energy throughout the entire trial, finally got permission to approach. He sniffed Mira thoroughly, checking for injuries, then turned to sniff Captain Chen with obvious suspicion. "Yeah, I know. I was the bad guy for a few minutes," Captain Chen said to the honey badger. "We cool?" Brutus considered this, then made his approval chuff and wandered off to investigate a maintenance panel, because even after 3 days of intensive evaluation, his primary motivation remained finding interesting things to investigate and possibly destroy. The evaluation was over. The observers gathered their data, compiled their reports, and prepared to submit their recommendations to the Council regarding humanity's application for advanced military trade agreements. But before the official results were announced, Ambassador Threx did something unprecedented. He requested a private meeting with Dr. Vasquez. They met in a small conference room, just the two of them, and for a long moment, Threx simply looked at the tired human woman who'd spent 3 days defending her species' choices. "I need to understand," he said finally. "That child, she's not exceptional by human standards, is she? She's average, perhaps even below average in some physical capabilities." "She's a normal 7-year-old, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. "Smart, brave, but nothing that wouldn't be found in millions of other human children. And the creature, Brutus, he's not a trained war beast. He's genuinely just her pet. Her partner, but yes, he's not military trained. He's just a honey badger doing what honey badgers do." Threx's mandibles clicked slowly, processing implications that terrified him. "So, if this is what you consider normal, what you send when you want to make a good impression but not reveal your true capabilities, then what are human military forces actually like?" Dr. Vasquez smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been underestimated for too long and was finally being taken seriously. "Ambassador, let me tell you about Earth. We have approximately 8 billion humans. Every single one of us grew up on a death world where the atmosphere can kill you, the water can kill you, the plants can kill you, and the animals really, really want to kill you. We domesticated wolves. We ride animals that could crush us with a single kick. We keep snakes as pets and cats as companions, despite the fact that both are perfect murder machines on a biological level." She leaned forward, and her tired eyes were suddenly very sharp. "Mira and Brutus represent something you need to understand about humanity. We don't just survive. We find the most dangerous, most impossible, most terrifying things in our environment, and we make friends with them. We partner with them. We bring them into our homes and our hearts and our families. And then we become more dangerous than we ever could have been alone." Threx felt his respiratory systems constrict. "You're saying that child isn't your weapon. She's your example." "She's our hope," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "She's what we want our children to be. Brave enough to try, smart enough to adapt, and kind enough to value partnership over domination. But yes, if you're asking whether humanity could be dangerous if provoked, the answer is absolutely yes, because we're a species that looked at honey badgers, the most fearless and vicious creatures on our planet, and thought they'd make excellent companions for our children." The implications hung in the air between them. Later that day, the Council convened to announce the evaluation results. Mira Kellison, representing Earth, had placed first in every category, except raw physical strength. Her tactical thinking, adaptability, endurance, and partnership capabilities exceeded all projections. Humanity's application for advanced military trade agreements was not just approved. It was fast-tracked, but more importantly, 3 separate civilizations immediately requested cultural exchange programs focused on human-animal partnerships. The Thurian hegemony wanted to study bond formation techniques. The Kryn Collective wanted to understand tactical cooperation methodologies. And the Kivalan Empire, despite themselves, wanted to know if honey badgers could be bred for compatibility with Kivalan warriors. Dr. Vasquez had to explain, repeatedly, that honey badgers could not be safely partnered with anyone except humans who'd raised them from infancy, and even then it was risky. And no, you couldn't just buy one, and absolutely not. They would not make good palace guards because they'd probably eat your palace. On the transport back to Earth, Mira slept with her head on Brutus's stomach, exhausted but happy. The honey badger kept watch with half-open eyes, his expression suggesting that the entire evaluation had been mildly interesting but ultimately not particularly challenging. Dr. Vasquez watched them and thought about the reports that would be filed, the diplomatic changes that would ripple across the galaxy, the way 3 days with a child and her honey badger had reshaped humanity's position among the stars. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said to Captain Chen, who was reviewing combat footage from Mira's trial. "What's that? We didn't send Mira because she was the best. We sent her because she volunteered, because Brutus was already cleared for space travel, and because we thought it would be good for a child to see other worlds. We had no idea it would turn into this." Captain Chen laughed. "That's humanity for you. We stumble into significance while just trying to do the right thing." Brutus made a sound, a low rumbling chuff that might have been agreement, or might have been him dreaming about the maintenance robot he'd terrorized. Mira stirred, mumbled something about wanting pancakes, and went back to sleep. And somewhere in the Galactic Council's Military Analysis Division, a report was being filed that would change interspecies combat doctrine forever. Its title was simple: Reassessment of Human Military Capability Based on Partnership Paradigm Observations. The first line read, "We have fundamentally misunderstood what makes humanity dangerous." The second line read, "They don't fight alone. They never fight alone. And that changes everything." 3 months later, humanity began receiving requests from junior diplomats, young warriors, and military academy students from across the galaxy. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted to meet a honey badger. Dr. Vasquez, who'd been promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations following the evaluation, had to establish an entire department just to handle the requests. She also had to write a very detailed guide titled, "Why You Cannot Have a Honey Badger and Why That's Probably for the Best." It became required reading in 17 different military academies. Mira went back to her normal life, attending school, playing with friends, and going on camping trips with Brutus. She occasionally appeared in diplomatic videos, usually looking slightly confused about why adults found her friendship with Brutus so fascinating. Brutus continued being Brutus, which meant he remained completely unbothered by his new status as the most famous animal in 3 sectors. He still dug holes in inappropriate places, still investigated everything, with single-minded intensity, and still served as Mira's faithful companion and unofficial guardian. And the galaxy learned a lesson that Earth had known for thousands of years. It's not the size of the creature in the fight that matters. It's the size of the fight in the creature and the strength of the bond between partners who trust each other completely. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage not with weapons or threats, but with a 7-year-old girl and her honey badger. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any army could have been. Because it meant that every human, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, carried that same potential for partnership. That same stubborn refusal to accept limitations, that same willingness to look at impossible situations and find the hidden solution. The galaxy would never make the mistake of underestimating humanity again. And it all started because a little girl named Mira Kellison loved her honey badger, and he loved her back. That was enough to change everything.